actual qualifications and ability to be proffered as an expert in forensic psychiatry.
You're saying your expert can testify to both components of the insanity, but this doctor cannot?
That is not what I'm saying, Your Honor. And as my expert has already been on the stand and only testified to whether the presence of a mental disease or defect, that is within the proper scope of the psychiatric evaluation. Correct. As to counsel's other argument that my objection is premature, this goes to the basis of forensic psychiatry at its core. As to the core of the science is to make ultimate legal conclusions in court on the stand, which has specifically been concluded by the Hinckley Amendment to Rule 704.
Your Honor, opposing counsel is offering you.
It's all right. I'm going to make that objection, I guess.
This is pursuant to what here?
Okay, I conclude that this doctor is more than qualified to testify in all matters of whether or not the defendant is part of an insanity plea.
Thank you.
The objection denied.
Dr. Johnson, there come a time where you evaluated John Draft?
Yes, I was hired to do a psychiatric workup and to testify regarding his insanity defense.
Were you able to come to a conclusion after regarding the mental state or whether or not the presence of a mental disease or defect within John Draft?
Yes.
In coming to that conclusion, what did you review?
I performed a battery of psychological tests, including the MMPI. I talked with him extensively over 10 hours of interviews over the course of a couple of months. And of course, I reviewed all the exhibits in the case.
Could you please explain to the jury what your conclusion was regarding John Draft?
I concluded that he...
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation, ultimate issue.
No rule.
I concluded that he was insane.
Objection, ultimate issue, Your Honor.
This is her opinion. She can make that opinion.
She can admit an opinion as to whether he's insane or sane.
Well, she can make the opinion as to whether or not his actions performed what we talked about, A and B of the test, right?
However, that's not what she just suggested. She suggested that he was in fact insane, which is the ultimate.
Okay. So objection, sustained. Want to rephrase?
Motion to strike, Your Honor.
Stricken.
Could you please explain to the jury what your conclusion was regarding the presence or lack thereof of a mental disease or defect within John Draft?
I concluded that at the time of the incident that is in question, he had a mental defect that prevented him
Objection,
from...
Your Honor. Lack of foundation, lack of personal knowledge. She's testifying at this point in time that he had a mental disease or defect on May 14, 2011. Not at the time of the evaluation. Not in addition, she has not provided the sufficient criteria for admitting an expert opinion according to 702. There has been no qualification that this witness has been, his opinion is based upon his experience, knowledge, or education, nor has there been any qualification as to the certainty of the opinion.
I believe that she has proper education, training, knowledge, experience to make an opinion. So and she testified that she spoke with the defendant over 10 hours. And regarding the MMPI, what do you object to, counsel?
I object to, first, her 10 hours worth of interviewing with the witness, being able to give her some indicia of what was occurring on May 14, 2011. There's been no testimony as to how psychiatry or forensic psychiatry can help a witness form an opinion as to what occurred prior to evaluating the patient.
But she's saying, according, if I'm wrong, she's saying she interviewed the defendant, and from her interviews and from her knowledge, training, and experience, it's her opinion at that time of that event. Had a mental defect. Am I wrong in what we're saying?
Yes, Your Honor. In addition, during what the opposing counsel established that it would be part of her expertise and part of her educated opinion to necessarily look back at times at which she was not present. He's established that this is indeed part of her expertise, and she's now opining on that very subject.
Counsel?
Your Honor, there was no battery of tests, no length of evaluation. that will allow her to know, with any degree of certainty, medical, scientific, or otherwise, as to what was going on in the mind of Mr. Draft on May 14, 2011.
Okay, well, you'll have your turn when you do the cross. Continue.
Well, first, before we get into the actual specifics of your conclusion, was your conclusion based on sufficient facts and data?
Yes, I reviewed all of the exhibits in the case. I talked extensively with Mr. Draft, and I performed an extensive battery of psychiatric tests.
And in doing so, did you use principles and methods reasonably relied upon in your field?
Yes, there were no problems with the tests. They were all according to standard procedures and best practices.
And did you come to your conclusion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
Can you please explain to the jury what your conclusion was regarding the presence or lack thereof of a mental disease or defect within John Draft?
I concluded that there is a presence of mental or whatever defect.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you spent 10 hours speaking with John Draft.
Yes.
Why was that?
Because I felt that I wanted to get a sense of his mental state over the course of time, not just for half an hour on one day.
Now, you were present earlier in the court when we heard testimony from Dr. Ciccona testifying that he had spent 30 minutes with the defendant. In your medical opinion, is that a sufficient amount of time to come to a conclusion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty? Your Honor, all expert witnesses are not secluded according to the rules.
Thank you.
In my professional opinion, that's not sufficient. And I also believe that he based some of his conclusions on my
Objection,
tests.
speculation.
I heard him say he based
Objection,
his...
speculation, motion to
Thank
strike.
We heard testimony earlier today that Dr. Ciccona based some of his opinions on your tests.
That is, yes.
And in your opinion, is using your conclusions on the MMPI test and the readout sufficient to come to any conclusions as to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
I believe it depends on the expertise and experience of the witness to put all the elements together to come to a